Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Skills for Mars, the podcast that articulates the future of work. Today we will discuss one of my favorite topics, building meaningful careers in an ever-changing world. My guests, Jamie Albers, the co-founder of Mento, an organization that helps the reskilled have an easier transition, understand the world of work and navigate the paradox of choice, and David Timis, who is joining us for the second time on the podcast. He is leading Global Communications for Generation, a non-profit that is training and placing people into life-changing careers around the world. We will talk about the impact this past 1.5 years has had on the job market, the harsh realities of career transitioning for the reskilled, transforming education to allow for multiple and diverse pathways throughout our lives, the 4 C's needed to succeed in the world of work. Through this podcast, we are bringing the future of work closer to you. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comment section below. Your views and your feedback are extremely important to the development of the podcast. Enjoy our conversation. Hi, Jamie. Hi, David, and welcome to Skills for Mars.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank
I'm
you.
excited to be here.
Very glad to be hosting you. I think this is a very timely discussion. We were just watching with David the World Economic Forum and talking about skills, reskilling, where the world is going, the future of work. Jamie, you've been involved in this for quite some time, and that's one of your passions. So very glad to be doing this with you.
Well, excited to opine on the future.
Just to have everyone know a bit about yourselves. David, we've done this before, but just a small introduction maybe for those who haven't watched our first round. Jamie, would you like to start a bit about yourself and what you do and what got you passionate about the future of work and the future of employment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi, I'm Jamie. And yeah, I'm a co-founder of Mento, which is a career support platform that helps people manage and navigate their careers. I started my career back at Google many moons ago. I jumped around at Google for quite some time, and then I spent the past 4 years at Jigsaw, which is a technology incubator owned by Google based in New York that develops technology to tackle some of the biggest challenges on the internet. Google's always talked a lot about the future of work, employment, skills development. But for me, what really sort of sparked my passion in this was through my work at Jigsaw, I got a chance to interact with a lot of women who were experiencing extreme challenges online. And it made me very scared for the future. If women around the world, particularly in more repressive societies where women don't necessarily have a voice, what happens if they can't develop the digital skills that they need to compete in today's or even exist in today's economy? So I started a data science training program for women in Nigeria a few years ago, and that just continued my passion. And here I am now. I started a whole company around it as a result, and also my own experience. Of course, we all have these moments throughout our careers where we're trying to figure out what it is that we want. And I felt like for the better part of a decade, I was in existential crises, trying to figure out where I was going and what I was doing. And so I'm like, okay, there's got to be a better way for us to all figure this out. So that's why I wanted to, dedicate my next decade to it, right? I think we all, who knows what our futures will hold now, because I feel like every few years we're all having these major career changes. So I don't want to say forever, but it's really important to me try to ensure that women, people of color, other folks not represented, particularly in technology, are able to find a pathway into better paying jobs.
Looking forward to talking about this, and I'm quite curious how Mento developed since the last time we spoke. David?
I'm going to be brief since I had the pleasure of joining one of your previous sessions. So I'm David, originally from Transylvania, Romania, communications consultant, online learning consultant. But the common thread of my work and the way I direct it is towards the future of work. And that's how we got in touch also with Jamie, in a sense, because we both worked at Google at the time in which Google, and it still is a company that puts a lot of emphasis on the future of work and helping people be better prepared for it. In my case, I was not working directly with Jigsaw. I was working with the Grow with Google program in Romania, my home country, where I was managing the initiative and training young people in digital skills. Then I moved to Brussels in the EU office of Google, where I trained politicians in digital skills. Fast forward a few years after, and we worked together with Jamie on Mento, her latest endeavor, which is a really exciting business that is trying also to help people in their job transitions. And I guess what brought us all here is the future of work. So looking forward to the discussion with both of you.
I think the first topic that we need to touch on is the current job environment and what's happening right now. I think everyone feels that it is unstable and insecure. If I've heard the numbers correctly, about 250 million people lost their jobs during the past year. About 81 million are going to lose their jobs in the next time to come. Plus, the moment the governments are going to stop their subsidies and the economic crisis will hit, I think a lot of people will get hurt, and the economy will get hurt, and then the whole society will get hurt. How do you feel this from? Definitely, Jamie, from your experience with Mento, with working with various companies, how does it feel in the trenches?
It's when we started working people on their job searches, call it right after the pandemic, a lot of people came to us. We're based in the US, and so we primarily work with folks in the US, and a lot of people came to us right as they got very suddenly laid off. And that was a really traumatic time for people. A lot of people that hadn't quite felt job insecurity before in that way, or maybe some people that had and felt really defeated by it. And a lot of people needing to figure out, well, what are my benefits? And I mean, not quite the same challenges for some of you guys in Europe over there, but healthcare is most people's healthcare is tied to employers here. Most people figuring out how to navigate unemployment insurance. I mean, it was a really, really difficult experience for a lot of people. And, a lot of people ended up moving back home with their families, moving to more affordable cities. So in some ways there are some, I think, interesting benefits that we'll see, particularly in the US, where economic growth was concentrated in a few urban cities. But, kind of coming out of that traumatic experience, I think there's a few things, which is that it forced people to think about, like, what makes me happy? What do I want to be doing? And so giving people an opportunity to maybe reroute, which is not something that you can normally do for a lot of people. But if you do have unemployment insurance, you might be able to. So in one way, for some people, that was amazing. I think for a lot of people, especially folks in the service industry that don't have a lot of support, there's huge question marks, particularly here in the US, about what's going to happen with the stimulus package and what restaurant reopenings look like and service industry looks like for folks here. We have seen that, especially for more white collar workers, there has been a rebound, and definitely for certain blue collar workers as well. Like delivery is huge right now. Everyone's getting everything delivered. Warehouse workers, tons of packages. These aren't sustainable solutions, but they do provide people with a paycheck. And that is important. Again, I think a lot will depend on what happens in the next, call it month or so here in terms of the stimulus package. We have started seeing things in job search improve. It just takes a long time. You're not going to find a job in 2 months. You're not going to have every recruiter knocking at your door like you might have used to, where a lot of people would be like, oh, this job fell in my lap. Like someone reached out to me on LinkedIn. We're good. People have to work harder for it because you're competing against maybe 250 other people who are applying for that job who might be just as qualified as you are. So we're going to see a lot of shifts. And I think that trend is going to stick around.
Yeah, it is incredible. And I think a lot of these jobs, as you just said, they are not sustainable, because the moment the service industry will go down, the delivery industry will go down, a lot of people will be left without jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure. But, what happens also long term to these jobs when automation displaces a lot of these folks. So that's something else that we have to think about as well. But I think just focusing on the next year and seeing how we can support the economy and make sure that people have, can pay their bills and maybe even pay their rent as well. Like that's kind of the main focus, I think, for right now is just, ensuring that people have some sort of employment.
I'm very curious. Are there any subsidies given or any legislation given to help them reskill?
Not that I know of. There are like loan forgiveness programs in the US. So if you go to law school and you work for the government for 10 years, you could have your loans forgiven. 10 years is a long time. Law school is not feasible for everyone for a variety of reasons. There are a lot more efforts in terms of the big thing that's happened is online education has exploded. I'm sure you guys have seen the similar trends in Europe. And so I think that's really where we're going to see interesting trends emerge. I'm not sure if these are as popular in Europe either, but for, ISAs have become very popular here in the US, which is an income share agreement, which basically says that you go to school for free, but then once you graduate and you're making over a certain amount, typically it's about $50,000 per year, then you give about, call it 17 to 20% of your income to the school or whoever was your loan provider for the next, 4 to 6 years, depending on your agreement. So that has become really popular as a way to for people to access education. And so those are usually through boot camps of some kind. So software developer, marketing, sales, you name it. But that I think has been that acceleration to online education. I think will have downstream effects, which is that it will become accessible to a lot more people who maybe hadn't considered it for themselves before.
I just hope that companies start recognizing this kind of education and not just university-based education. There are a lot of online courses that you can take right now, but not a lot of employers recognize them or recognize that sort of education. I know, David, I heard you talking in one of your latest podcasts about where education should go and who should be responsible about this. If you want to share your insights, that would be amazing.
Sure, but before, since I logged out for a second and I didn't have a chance to contribute to the first question, I just wanted to make sure it's also very clear, because sometimes I forget, being too caught up in calls, but, I do forget this sometimes and I do want to remember it more. And I hope some of the people watching will also go for the same phase of remembering and realizing how lucky we are, because what COVID has done globally is it increased inequalities and disparities that were already there. So we are lucky that we're, able now to work remotely. So for many people, this whole crisis enabled them now to work remotely, which can be a real benefit for many of us. And also it allowed us, as Jamie was saying, to recalibrate a bit and think what we want to do. If we had enough cash put on the side to support us during this reflection time, or if we had a job at the time and did this on the side. But many people didn't. And what I see more and more is, as you also said, Julia, how now governments are offering various schemes like furloughs and so on to keep businesses and people afloat. But when this will stop, it's a big, big question what will happen to many, many people around the world. And I'm genuinely concerned about this because, from our previous discussion, I'm a huge supporter of solutions like universal basic income, at least for the short term, until something better is found, to support millions of people who will be at a higher risk of everything from emotional to financial turmoil after the pandemic resides. But going back now to your question on education, and we've discussed a lot about this also with Jamie during our collaboration and informally as well as friends, how nowadays we do live in this, as I like to call it sometimes, slot machine world in which we want results fast, and education is not built for this. Education is built for you staying in a class ideally for 4 years and then getting a degree that doesn't guarantee you any job or source of income. And I think that's sort of a form of education is slowly but surely dying, and for a good reason, because it's not really representative of the world we live in. And I foresee ideally a future in which employers and education providers are collaborating very closely, so that it's, if not a guarantee, or a given, it's a high chance that after you finish a certain class or training, it's pragmatic enough and practical enough that you'll have a job at the end of it. And the lifespan of education will also change, because since we have to now go through lifelong learning, you're not going to go for a 4-year degree. You might go for, this sort of a micro-credential format that Google was also really pushing for with Udacity of 1-year micro-credential in one subject, and maybe in 5 years you need to reskill in a completely different subject. So credential-based shorter-term education formats that are really putting both employers and education providers at the same table are the key in the future, in my opinion. And everything else will, without trying to be too dramatic, will either die or not be in the top anymore. So definitely education needs to be, revolutionized in some way. And hopefully the pandemic will increase the chances of that happening soon.
Have you seen any kind of movement? Rethinking education, basically.
I've seen it, but it's just at the really, it's not scalable yet. It's something that maybe Harvard or Stanford are doing, or Oxford and Cambridge, the top schools in the world, which already had many advantages. So they're already in touch with employers. They already have degrees which are, if not collaboratively done with maybe the tech employer, but really in a close connection with. And there's famous programs at Stanford and at other top universities in which most graduates end up in some of these companies. So there are examples, but it's nothing which is yet scalable to all employees, maybe even the least attractive ones, because obviously most people do want to try out working for a tech company these days, but not maybe everybody wants to work for one of the more traditional employers from what maybe was sexy for our parents or our grandparents. So it should be replicable for all employers, and I haven't at least yet seen such a model with traditional education. However, with other programs of reskilling, I think there's much more potential. And what I foresee is that, again, the innovation will come from private companies or NGOs outside of the mainstream education that will innovate, and then hopefully open-minded ministries of education and governments will take that model and scale it nationally.
I feel that the current world right now has endless possibilities for people choosing careers. Like literally, if you decide to do something, there's training about it. You can find jobs at the intersection of various skills that you have. You can even invent jobs and sell yourself on the market. And I think we've never had this sort of opportunities in our life. Do people still feel it like this, especially now that they're coming from a place of fear, of not really understanding insecurity, not really understanding what's going to happen? Do they see the array of possibilities that they have? Do you have to coach them in a certain direction? How does it happen?
Yeah, so I think there's a few interesting trends that are happening that I see. One, career switching is still incredibly difficult, just because you can, and I think this is part of the challenge that the education system, or like this new emergent education system, is going to need to solve, is it's still very, very challenging. And like 9 months in a software developer program might not actually be enough to be workplace ready. And particularly in the US, we don't really have a lot of transition programs of an apprenticeship. Internships are technically usually reserved for, new grads, like university system. So I think that there's a big opportunity to try to switch that and model so that people who are making career switches have a pathway into these new roles. But otherwise, it's still very, very hard to do on your own. So I think that is like one of the most difficult things that people who, let's say, were working in a service industry job, let's say working as in a restaurant, then they go to a UX design boot camp for 4 months. And it's a pretty harsh reality to realize that you're not actually prepared to enter into a new job. Like, where do you go? So I also think, to David's point, we need to have a tighter feedback loop between employers and new educators in order to actually help people more easily transition. Again, it's very much possible. It will get easier because I think companies and hiring managers and recruiters will all become more accustomed to seeing this. I think we still have a bias for traditional things that we can recognize as like a place where you've worked, or in the US in particular, a particular type of university degree. So I think there's that trend that will be interesting to see how that happens. There's definitely a paradox of choice. And not knowing all that's out there and then discovering all that's out there and trying to figure it out. It does feel like, in one hand, there's endless opportunities, that you are constantly learning, especially for people who have not been in the tech industry but are trying to move into it. The tech industry has a million different jobs, a million different job titles that vary by company. And so it's actually incredibly confusing to navigate and try to figure it out. And then I think the other thing that we see across the board is people just want, their basics met. Like, we've worked a lot with Amazon warehouse workers who are upskilling, in front-end development and are trying to make a transition. And a lot of what people just want is, I want to be able to work from home so I can spend more time with my family. I don't want physical labor because it's hard on my body. People have like pretty basic needs that need to be met still in the workplace, but making that transition and navigating it can be quite difficult. And that's where both technical education and soft skills, and I think, again, this is also where new emergent educations haven't quite caught up, is that the way their compensation model doesn't necessarily, you're trying to get people in and out usually as quickly as possible. And that doesn't mean they're trying to provide them great training, but there also isn't as much like, this is how you navigate a workplace that's mostly tech-based and you're on your computer all the time, and how you work from remote and communicate with colleagues. Like, there's all these things that you kind of pick up by virtue of being in certain education systems, by seeing other people go into certain types of jobs, being taught certain things, or just being able to pick it up by your environment. So I think there needs to be like a great mesh of all of these things to help people. And lastly, I also just think is that people really care about their happiness. People aren't always going, and I think this is something that I think a lot of people felt after the pandemic, is like, life is short, or, you only like, do you need to be on the hedonic treadmill of like trying to climb XYZ corporate ladder and giving up your life for it? Because that's often what it requires. You might be making a lot of money, but if you have no life and you're just kind of go, like what does that mean for
What's
you?
the point?
That doesn't necessarily breed happiness. So that's another thing a lot of people are trying to figure out.
I'm actually happy to hear that. I'm actually happy to hear that people are
it's
stepping
nice,
out
right?
of the rat wheel. Yes.
Exactly. And that's what I'm like, the hedonic treadmill is always going to be there for you. You're always going to think that you need to be doing more. And it's a struggle that we all face. But it's, there are other ways. You don't have to do that if that's not what makes you happy.
I'm also happy that careers are not for life anymore. And I know we were chatting previously, and you were saying, hey, people now in tech change jobs every 2-3 years. Yeah. I'm like, yes, finally this is happening. I mean, who wants to get stuck? I work sometimes with people that are in the same job for 25, 30, 35 years. I had one guy who was in his job for more than 40 years in one job.
Wow.
One job. He got to kind of high level, same job, same company. I'm sorry, but what's the value for you and what's the value for the company at some point? Because you know everyone, you know your way around, you know exactly how to swim through the lanes to get things done. And it's just becoming comfortable. I think comfortable is not good anymore. We shouldn't get comfortable. Changing jobs quite frequently, learning new skills, being there always on the time, all the time, ready to do something new is what will keep us running. But I'm curious, you were mentioning, Jamie, about the Amazon and the front-end development switch. How did it work? Is it still ongoing?
Yeah, so it's done through Amazon. They have a career choice program. Their goal is to upskill 100,000 warehouse workers whose jobs will be displaced by automation. So it's not just, workers tend to have a choice. There's a bunch of different programs they can choose. And a lot of people are opting for front-end development. So they take about a 6-month course. They have to do it on their weekend. So 5 days are at the warehouse or in their normal capacity. And 2 days are spent training and learning how to become front-end developers.
Is it working?
That's a great question. We're working with these folks on, they're preparing for their job search. So helping them with all of their materials, helping them prepare for interviews, helping them set up a plan and strategy, helping them figure out places where they might want to go. What kind of, there are like, I think one of the beauties, which I didn't mention before, but is like, if you have this training, it does open up doors for you, even if you don't want to be a front end developer. Maybe you want to go into IT support. Maybe you want to go into technical customer success. Like maybe you want to go into QA. There's lots of other roles that this opens up to you because you have some sort of technical understanding. So, and I think that's something that's phenomenal, is that, making that switch to maybe white collar work or remote work where you can have some of these things, and then you can kind of figure out what to do. And I think that's something that I have become increasingly interested in, is like, how do we help people think about their careers in terms of a progression? I think oftentimes the way we think in society, and this goes back to my existential crises that I had, was that like you always need to be like at the place that you're supposed to be, but your career has been a progression. I started out in customer service at Google, 8662 Google. You called, you got me on the phone. And it's like, you always have to remind yourself that your first step into a job or into an industry is certainly not going to be your last. But how do you help people identify these pathways to getting to where they want to go, or getting to even experience with something is like, you don't have to make a commitment to being a front end developer. And then on top of that, there's this new whole industry of passion projects, of everybody having their side projects and doing things on the side. So, if you want to do your IT support, then continue, find that online community of developers, join hackathons. Like, there's so much out there for people to continue to hone their skills and learn about themselves, learn about what they want to do, what makes them happy, and to chart that path. And that's one of the reasons why, particularly in terms of Mento, why we want to stay with people throughout their careers, is that your career isn't like a one-off. Just transitioning to a job is not just like a thing and then you're done. It's like, okay, well, what happens afterward? Upskilling, transitioning smoothly into that company. But then you're also always faced with these questions of like, is this making me happy? Is this what I want to do? If there's something else that I want to do, how else should I be thinking about it? So just continuing to provide people support throughout these processes, throughout these different opportunities to learn about ourselves and what we want, is really crucial, I think, into terms of helping people transition into the economy and make way for, even though switching jobs every 2 years is great, it also does breed insecurity, because you're basically always thinking about what you want to do next, or what you should be doing next, or, it does create it can create more stress.
For sure. But you can get used to that as well. But I'm curious how you guys think about upskilling, reskilling, learning something new, and the blockages towards that. Because I find that a lot of the blockages are not so much with education and even government, but a lot of them are with the individual in switching careers, especially at a later age.
Yeah, imposter syndrome is so real for everyone. Honestly, I think that's a mentality shift, and developing that self-confidence that you can do that. I think David has a lot of good thoughts on this, so I'd be curious what he has to say as a big champion and believer in having a growth mindset. But yeah, I think, if you don't see a lot of people around you that are in the same position, you might not know anyone that has that kind of job. So how can you model yourself after? Or, I'm the old guy in the room and that's tough for me. Like, you can imagine so many different ways that this manifests, but particularly in a society where, you might be the only career switcher that came from a warehouse, like that's definitely not going to always imbue you with confidence. You're probably always going to say like, do I really belong here? But I think we all feel those things in different ways and at different times in our careers. And I think that's also what we believe is part of our role, is helping people build their self-confidence, which honestly, everyone can use a bit of. It's something very much we've noticed. We're all our harshest critics, and helping people believe in themselves and find what their superpowers and understand their superpowers and be able to articulate that and be proud of that is a whole process that people need to go through. And I think that's something that we've we've seen a lot. That was a surprise. I didn't quite realize that was going to be such a big part of the job transition process. But I think again, that's why people also need support, and it can be hard to do on your own.
It is hard. David, I'm curious on your thoughts as well.
I wanted to add to what Jamie said, or maybe to complement the fact that I think what Mento does really good is it occupies this, or it comes in this niche of, in a sense, career coaching, because many of the people we've trained and people in general, I can name one, myself, we didn't really take advantage or had the opportunity to be career coach when we were young in high school or at critical stages of our life. And this is a global issue, especially now when we live in the paradox of choice. Who's teaching our brothers, sisters, kids? Who's teaching them how to choose a career when there's so many options and there's so much diversity? And I think this is what Mento does really well of coming in and filling in this gap and helping many people figure out what's their next step and how to make it properly. But then what also I realized working with Jamie over the summer was that reskilling is not exactly as she said, is not something that is a couple of weeks done, next cohort. No, it's actually a long-term process in which you have to even provide mentorship to the trainees, to the students after they get a job. Reskilling and changing industry is not easy. Yet we do live in a world with many options, and I also am a big fan of switching careers and making sure you do something you love, because we only live one life. But nobody's really prepared, regardless of who you are, of what your superpower is, but nobody's really prepared to do these transitions. And it's good to see organizations like Mento and others that are coming in to fill this gap to help us navigate this sea of change and the career transitions that more and more of us will do in the future. So I think reskilling in the future will be done by organizations that manage to go, full circle of reskilling people, mentoring them, so actually reskilling them, helping them get a job, and then still mentoring them once they have that job secured, because you're not done. You still need those, especially those first 6 months. You need all the support you can get, especially if you changed industry completely. So the challenges are huge, but also it's again, I want to end on a positive note. It's great to see that organizations are stepping up to fill this void of career coaching and job search transition support.
But I think you're both touching on something, and you've touched during the whole discussion about something very sensitive and not really happening at this point. How we coordinate between educators, business, and government.
It's true. It's definitely true. There's not enough alignment, and I see it in my home country in Romania and in other places in the world. There's still this lack of dialogue, literally, between employers and employees. There are good examples. There's countries, and I think I remember an example a friend of mine from Sweden gave me, if I'm not mistaken, in which in Sweden every year the government plans the sort of demand for the labor market. So if there's a huge demand for doctors, more seats will be available in universities that have this domain, medicine universities. If there's a bigger demand in IT support specialists, those universities that specialize people in this subject will have more seats available. So matching supply and demand is something we often forget to do, and it's super important. In Romania is a country which is famous for, and you probably know very well, growing up in Romania, Julia, how it was a huge number of people who was at some point studying for international relations. And we're not the US. We don't have that international exposure to really use such a degree
or
to actually work in this field. And it's just one subject. And I did international relations as well recently, so I don't have anything against people who do this, but because the universities encourage people to do it and not really have a plan for them when they finish university and have enough jobs for people finishing with this and other specialities, there is a problem. And that's how it all links. You don't have a career coach, so you end up studying for something that is maybe not so relevant for you, and also maybe not so useful for society in that year or in that point of time. And then you end up going for more educations and paying for more programs that could have been sorted if you'd got that proper support initially. And if governments, or actually Ministry of Educations and universities, would collaborate more closely with employers from the start, when even they design the curriculum, not just when the students finish the university or the master program.
Jamie, tell me what's next for Mento. Where are you now? What's next? How is Mento developing?
Great question. So yeah, right now, we are in the process of developing a product to help people, from the start of their job search, like when they're thinking about it, through to when they find a job and beyond. So staying with them as they onboard and make that transition into a new role, and then stay with them every month, whether it be through content or courses, tools to manage our career, things like that. Right
Is this
now,
an
our
app?
first it will be
Okay.
one day. I'm just giving you a view into the future because, we're friends. Right now, we are heavily focused on our job search product and experience. And, the way that we even start our experience with the job search is what we call the self-discovery process. Because what we found working with hundreds of job searchers is that people would go through the job search and then realize that they wanted to do something else. Because they were, when you're going through your job search, you're forced to take a pretty hard look in the mirror. Like, well, why do you even want to work there? Why do you want that job? What does interest you? What does make you happy? Or honestly, like, what does your skills even match right now? Maybe going for that, senior software engineering job isn't the best next step for you. Maybe it's saying, okay, I just graduated from this boot camp. I'm going to go join. The most important thing to me right now is security, stability. I want, a 40-hour work week kind of job. So I'm going to go into a role for an amazing company as a technical success manager, not as a designer or developer, but on the side, I'm going to work on all those skills. And then I hope that I'm going to transition into that role. So those are the kinds of things that we help people with. And by building a product that we can help people from start to the end of their job search. So then also a big emphasis for us is really helping people develop their communication skills as well. So a lot of the job search is storytelling, is learning how to tell your story, communicate your story. And then, learning how to apply to jobs. There's a whole situation around that as well, especially right now when things are very competitive, but also particularly in the US market, it's very referral based. So how do you get a network if you don't have one? So we try to help people navigate that. And then of course, the emotional roller coaster of a job search. It's really hard. It's emotionally taxing. The ups and downs, the one day you get the interview, the next day you get rejected from a job. Some weeks are great, things are going, the next week isn't. This is just the nature of the search and everyone experiences it. So a big part of it as well is just helping people stay motivated, continue to optimize. Like maybe we need to change something up here, or maybe we need to think about another path here, and just staying motivated so that people do end up in that next role. So that's what we're building right now. Our goal by building a product around this is to make it more affordable and accessible to people. Because we think everyone deserves access to great career support and support in their job transitions in particular. And in particular right now, when so many of us are trying to find our way. So yeah, that's a little preview.
And David, how are you? Are you still involved in Mental?
I'm still collaborating. We have a call with Jamie later today to catch up.
Never letting David go. Don't worry.
No, you shouldn't.
But since you asked about this, and maybe connecting to my last point, because I realized, both of you got to know me, and I'm a fairly positive and optimistic guy. And I don't want to end my remarks on a, let's say, more negative note in which I was describing how there's still this lack of supply meets demand in education. As you might know also, Yulia, I think in our last chat we discussed a bit about this. I'm a strong believer in really going back to the basics, because now obviously in the times that we live in, also in terms of subjects you can study, there's a lot of opportunities, and in terms of from languages to coding languages you can study. I think in order to be best prepared for whatever the future holds, we should double down on the basics, which are the 4 C's, which I mentioned in my TED Talk in Luxembourg a couple of years ago. It's what the US government promoted during Obama's administration. It's critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity, the skills that will be relevant for years to come in most industries, in most fields, and which most students, or all students ideally, should learn starting from high school and then obviously in higher education. And then probably the pandemic also showed how beyond these skills, which are again safe skills to learn that won't change too much, or the industries that need them won't change too much in the future, or you will still be able to use them. We will also need this ability to deal with change, which I think it's again not part of any curriculum per se, but activities that help students develop this, such as volunteering and doing projects outside of the typical exams and essays would also help. The ability to preserve one's mental health is also very important, especially nowadays for both students and employees and people in general, which again, universities are not now doing something about, or at least not enough, but I think there's a huge chance of, again, actually introducing in the curriculum mindfulness or meditation practices, again, from an earlier age than university, ideally even in primary school or secondary school. And there are schools doing this, but it's not yet scaled. And finally, I think and I've read this in a book I've read over the holidays, the Christmas holidays, we actually, and I don't want to break it for educators, but we don't really actually need formal education. We just need to acquire a desire to read and to love books. And if this would be the only goal that education managed to achieve, is to make pupils, young people, love reading and equipping them with the passion and an insatiable desire to learn, that's a job well done, because no school or university can prepare you for what the future holds. As I said, it's really volatile. It's, besides a few basic skills, it's hard to predict what will be relevant and needed. But if you develop from an early age a desire to learn and read and develop yourself,
curiosity,
you're pretty much set for life. Yeah. So that's my final positive message on education.
And the only other thing that I would say on that is I also just think school and the role of education is to help teach people social skills. Yep. That forms the bedrock of a lot of our self-confidence, our understanding of ourselves. Social relationships are so critical to our well-being, to our curiosity. Being around other people who are curious can teach us things. And I think that is a really important role of school, especially for people who might also not maybe go into a formal university style 4-year education and go right into the workforce. Social skills, collaboration skills are going to be effectively working with others is one of the most important things.
Jamie, where can people find the Mento if they want to reach out?
We are on the World Wide Web. We have a website, mento.co. Also on the relevant social networks, But yeah, I hope to hear from people. Shoot us a note.
Perfect. I'll make sure to put all the links in the description, both on YouTube and LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So people can find you and get the right support they need for their career.
Good.
Thank you both so much for today.
Yes, thank you for having us. This was an amazing conversation.